Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this podcast of Institut Sapiens. I'm Esther Clarksoni, research analyst at Institut Sapiens, and I have the chance of welcoming Rishan Da Silva, executive director of the Sri Lanka-based think tank, the Geopolitical Cartographer, today. So Rishan, who holds an undergraduate degree in international in international political science from Columbia University, and a master's degree in social anthropology from the University of Oxford, is an expert of the Indian Ocean region that we will discuss today, with its constantly evolving economic and geopolitical dynamics. Rishan has not only extensive academic knowledge, but also practical expertise in Indian ocean trade, gained within a variety of organizations and industries, including development consultancy, technology, commodities, and retail. Furthermore, Rishan also has experience in the region's governance and its international relations, having previously served as research analyst for former Prime Minister, and please excuse me for my pronunciation, Ranil Wickremesinghe. I hope it was more or less correct, and later as his advisor on international affairs in the president's office. So, dear Rishan, thank you for having accepted our invitation to join us today to talk about the Indian Ocean's main prospects and challenges as we look ahead to 2025. Just before we start, please allow me to provide the audience with a few observations, information as to the region's geopolitical and economic importance today. So the Indian Ocean region is central to ongoing and coming geoeconomic shifts and transformations as it became a theater of great power competition, an economic powerhouse, also cornerstone of maritime trade and security, and an essential commercial hub. Moreover, the region of the Indian Ocean is also crucial to France and to France's security, economy, and diplomatic leverage, being the only EU member state present in the region thanks to its overseas territories. Well, in the midst of the ongoing power competition in the region, middle powers are rising and shaping the future of the Indian Ocean and its coastal territories. And more broadly, the future of the international order through partnerships, alliances, and infrastructure projects, among others. So considering these dynamics, we are eager to explore the opportunities and the risks the region is facing. Dear Rishan, to begin, please, I will give you the floor, of course, to introduce yourself, to introduce the geopolitical cartographer. And we would also like to ask you to kind of like provide us with an overview of the region's unique geographical characteristics and more precisely to explain Sri Lanka's position in it.
Great. Thank you very much, Esther, for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today with you in the Sapiens Institute. I want to also thank Dominic for his kind introduction to this event. And yes, I believe I shared some slides with you, so I can go through some of those with you as well. The Geopolitical Cartographer is a research foundation which specializes in the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the connected land masses, which we believe are redrawing the global order. The Geopolitical Cartographer focuses on geopolitics, geoeconomics, and maritime affairs of these regions. And it was founded by then former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, when he was just Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. And since forming the research foundation, as some of you know, Sri Lanka went through an economic crisis in 2022. And so then he had to rejoin the government. First he rejoined as an MP, then he became Prime Minister, and then in May of 2022, and then in July of 2022, he was elected president by the parliament, following an economic uprising against the previous administration. So this Well, our founder has been speaking about the Indian Ocean region for many decades, actually, since he was first uh, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in 1977. Um, he has been talking about this region, and he founded this research foundation with the idea that it is the emerging geopolitical cartography of the Indian Ocean that will play a dominant role in shaping the equilibrium of power in the Indo-Pacific, which is the emerging global powerhouse. So we focus on these same issues as I mentioned previously, and we try to act as a regional and public policy research foundation. All of our members contribute their ideas regardless of partisan bias, and it is a non-profit making think tank as well. So if we can move to the next slide, I'd like to start, these are some of our board members with the Commonwealth Secretary General, which was the inaugural lecture that we had for the geopolitical cartographer. The significance of the Commonwealth Secretary General delivering the inaugural lecture was because the first international organization that Sri Lanka joined when they gained independence on February 4th of 1948 was the Commonwealth. And so this was because at the time, some of the countries that were being backed by the Soviet Union were blocked by the United States from joining the United Nations. And as a result, Sri Lanka, which was backed by the United States, was blocked by the Soviet Union from joining the United Nations. But obviously later on, we joined the United Nations. And this talk, as well as others, are available on our website, which you can check out at geopoliticalcartographer.com. So we like to, given our name, we like to start with some maps. And this is probably a map that many of your viewers have seen because it is somewhat of a European, well, it was taken from the work Geographical by Ptolemy, written in 150 AD. And this map, I think, was a redrawing done in around the 13th century. So it's a European perspective of the world and one of the earliest drawings of the world as viewed from a European, or what is today known as a European perspective, by this ancient Greco-Roman cartographer. And what's interesting in this map, if you look towards the right side of the map, you'll see what is today known as the Indian Ocean. And you'll see like a large landmass in the Indian Ocean, which is written as Chaprabana. And some of the later versions of this map, I believe we have a later version of the map, which was drawn in the 15th century, as the next slide shows this name, Chaprabana. So the importance of our island is obviously accentuated by the early cartographers who thought the land to be much bigger because of how it was featured by the tradesmen and the people who were visiting the area. There's some reports by some of the early Greek navigators that when they were traveling around the island, they would smell cinnamon. And this is because Sri Lanka, or what is today known as Sri Lanka, then known as Taprabana to these Greek cartographers, featured heavily in the spice trade, which saw spices moving around the world. Another interesting feature about this map is that the Indian Ocean is seen as an enclosed space, which is different from obviously how we view it today with its interconnectedness with the Pacific Ocean, but interconnectedness through the lens of ASEAN, I would add, because ASEAN manages the connected areas as per their outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which is a 2018 document. So for millennia, traders have traversed this Indian Ocean region, stopping in what is today called Sri Lanka. And in the past, we had many different names. The Arab traders called us Serendib, which is interestingly, the etymological root of the word serendipity. Other names included Lanka, Ilankai, Tambapani, Taprobane or Taprobana, and Chelau, which I believe is a name given to the island by the Portuguese. So in the from the 15th century, we had the Portuguese colonized the island, but it wasn't the entire island; it was just the coastlines. And they were there for about 150 years. Then around the mid 1650s, we had the Dutch take over from the Portuguese, again for 150 years, and again along the coastlines. And then around the 19th century, turn of the 19th century, we had the British, who managed to colonize the entire island, taking over the Kingdom of Kandy, which was one of the last kingdoms which hadn't been taken over by the colonizers. And so the British also colonized us for about 150 years. But what's interesting about Sri Lanka is that we have this shared heritage, which dates to the Portuguese, to the British, to the Dutch. Take my name, for example, Rishan De Silva. De Silva, as you know, comes from Portuguese roots. And then not just in terms of the soft power, you also have the infrastructure projects that these various colonial powers administrators had. So the Portuguese had these forts which are around the island, and you can still visit them today. The Dutch then fortified some of these forts, and I guess the most well-known is the Gaul Fort in the south, which is also a UNESCO heritage site. And we have many such examples of the impact of the colonial administration, not just in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of our legal structure, where there is our law still has elements of Dutch reform law, and I think we in South Africa are two of the few countries that still have this. And so we view this as our shared heritage. And I know in this modern day there are various discussions of colonization, but in Sri Lanka's understanding, it's a bit different, because even under the British from around 1930, under the Donoughmore Constitution, we had universal suffrage. So that meant we had an independent government under the British, and we would by that definition of universal suffrage, we are Asia's oldest democracy. So we had this interaction with the colonial administrators. Interestingly, also to note, in differing us a little from our big, what some call our big brother next door, India, when the British took over the island, they kept Sri Lanka as a crown colony from the outset, which is a bit different from India. And so we didn't have as much of this antagonism that some of the other colonial regions had towards the colonial powers. And still to this day, you'll find that if you visited the island, there people from all of these different colonial groups still have heritage here, and it's well received, and people still like to engage with all the people who visit. I brought up this other map because this is a map from World War II, and interestingly, the Japanese, it's a pictorial map, and you can see that when the Japanese entered the Bay of Bengal through the Strait of Malacca, you can see two islands, which are Andaman and Nicobar, which have the Japanese flags flying, because the Imperial Japanese Navy managed to take over these two islands. And then they wanted to set up a base in Ceylon, which is the name the British used for Sri Lanka. And the independent government decided instead to allow the Allied forces to set up a base here. So this was in exchange for independence. So the Allied forces said that Sri Lanka would gain their independence, but it would have to be after India. And the Southeast Asia Command was inaugurated in Delhi and then headquartered in Ceylon. And this is the first time the phrase Southeast Asia was used. So Sri Lanka has a strong history of being part of Southeast Asia as well. And so not just in terms of culture in Southeast Asia, we also have Theravada Buddhism, which is the majority religion in Sri Lanka. And you get this similar kinds of Buddhism across other parts of Southeast Asia. So it's often said that we brought it, Buddhism was brought from India to Sri Lanka, but we managed to hold on to it. Or from what is today known as India. So the Japanese took over Andaman and Nicobar, and they were trying to take over Ceylon as well. And in 1942, they in fact bombed Ceylon on April 5th and April 7th, which is the first time there was an Easter Sunday attack in our island. And the Eastern Fleet was based in a port in the northeast of our island called Trincomalee. And they managed to navigate around the island to evade the Japanese aircraft carriers. Though on the eastern coast, there are two ships that were sunk by these Japanese bombers. One which was a small, like a helicopter carrier, HMS Hermes. So that is the first time that there was a helicopter or an aircraft carrier battle in the Indian Ocean. And hopefully it'll be the only time. So they also sank two ships off the west coast of Ceylon, which is Colombo. And these were HMS Dorsetshire and HMS Cornwall. And if they had flown in 15 minutes more in the direction which those ships were coming, they would have found the entire Eastern Fleet, which had by then navigated to the Adu Atoll in the Maldives. But because they weren't able to intercept these lines of communication, the Eastern Fleet was able to navigate around, or because they were able to intercept the Japanese lines of communication, they were able to navigate around the island and evade this attack. And because of this, Winston Churchill is often, former Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill, is often credited as saying that the Indian Ocean was crucial for the war effort. So after that, in 1947, August, India gained their independence. And in 1948, February 4th, Sri Lanka gained their independence. And that independence, it's often stated that, well, it was stated in the London Times that this island, Ceylon, was supposed to be the Switzerland of the East. The headlines on the front page of the London Times at the time. Yes, if you move to the next slide, we'll be able to see that because of how the Japanese were repelled from taking over Ceylon, their limit of control. This map was shared by one of our Australian members, Dr. David Brewster, who's from the National Security College of ANU. And through it, you can see that the line of control, the limit of control of the IJ and Imperial Japanese Navy only stretched up to Andaman and Nicobar. This same, I guess you can see in the next map. And so at independence, the first, as I mentioned earlier, the first international organization that we joined was the Commonwealth. And from there, the Colombo Plan began, bringing together some of these Commonwealth members. And the Colombo Plan basically was to try and avoid or avert the spread of communism into this region. And then we had the Colombo Powers Conference in 1954 in Kandy, which is the first time that the Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, spoke of non-alignment. And from 1954, we had the Bandung Conference in Indonesia, which led to the non-aligned movement. So the reason I like to talk about this is because in 1970, around the time that Diego Garcia, which is an island also in the Indian Ocean, which was under British control, was transferred to the United States. At around the same time, the non-aligned movement met in Lusaka in Zambia, in Africa, and they decided then that the Indian Ocean would be a peace zone. And Sri Lanka or Ceylon brought forward this proposal in 1971 to the United Nations, and it was ratified at the United Nations that there wouldn't be this great power rivalry that has taken place in other oceans. That would not take place in the Indian Ocean, and that the Indian Ocean would remain free for trade and commerce and cooperation. So this is very much part of Sri Lanka's heritage. Obviously, since then, there have been various international organizations that Sri Lanka has joined, be it the IORA in 1997, and the geopolitical cartographer is also a member of this academic group. So it's the Indian Ocean Rim academic group, the littoral states of the Indian Ocean. Then you had the IONS also in 2008. One organization that we did join earlier in 1985 was SARC, which was supposed to be a grouping of South Asian countries, but unfortunately this hasn't taken off as well as ASEAN. And we often talk about ASEAN because Ceylon was offered membership to ASEAN in 1967, and Thailand kept it open for an extra day as well, with the idea that Ceylon would join, but they didn't join at the time. And so I think some in Sri Lanka look at the interregional trade in ASEAN, which today stands around 25%, whereas in SAARC, the interregional trade is about 3 to 5%. So that's a much better integrated economic unit. Other organizations that we joined, the BIMSTEC, and there are various other organizations which we can get into later as well. But this was just to basically position Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean, give you a sense of where we are. And I think only by seeing where we are can we truly understand where we're going. Yes.
Thank you so much, Prishan. Definitely, I think, as you mentioned, you allowed us to understand, on the one hand, that geography matters, second, that history does matter, and third, that perceptions matter as well. And of course, well, in today's world, a very realistic word, interests matter, and hopefully values as well. So I think based on these elements, that really allowed us to have a general overview of the region, its specificities, of course, Sri Lanka's incredibly central position in the region, as you really showed us, and as you showed us during the centuries, the centrality of the island, and of course the historical storms that went through and passed through the island. Now we know the history, now we know the geography. We would like to know a bit more about the present, if that is possible, and of course how these geographical specificities and states' interests and sometimes values influence their actions. So we would like to talk a bit more about risks that are coming up for 2025, but even further on. So we would like to delve into these current risks that we are facing, that the region is facing, but of course everything is interconnected. So some risks that the region might face can be global and can indeed inflect and influence others. So just, to give us some some basic points and, kind of like a logical continuation of our presentation, we thought of going through the risks that were identified by the World Economics Forum Global Risk Report. They carried out, and they annually do, a global risk perception survey. And so for 2025, they identified three main risks. More than that, but I would only like to tackle these three because unfortunately we do not have so much time, and I'm conscious of time that is passing by. So the first risk is state-based armed conflict, so ranking first on the list, followed by extreme weather events and geoeconomic confrontation. So here I would like to ask you, do you consider these three global risks that were mentioned by the Global Risk Report as the three main ones for the region and more specifically for Sri Lanka in 2025? Or do you have other risks in mind? Would you modify that list? And then later on, we can also delve into the specific risks, the country-specific risks, because the same report also built up classification for the specific risks for Sri Lanka.
Yes, thank you for that. I didn't get to go through some of what I wanted to talk about with the Indo-Pacific, but hopefully we'll have some time to get into that a bit later. So in terms of the immediate risks that are facing our region, this region is projected to have a lot of growth. The way, I guess, even if you look at the IMF's World Economic Outlook, which came out just before the forum this year, there is the greatest growth is taking place in emerging and developing Asia is, I think, the term that they use. So you have India leading the way, obviously, with about 6.5% growth for this year and next year, with China then and ASEAN coming in next with about 4.6 and 4.5% for the following year. And then after that, you have Sub-Saharan Africa. So we can really see that this region, this Indian Ocean region, is where the growth is taking place. And so it's important for us that in this sense that we don't get drawn into this great power rivalry and competition, but instead that the great powers that are here, that they, while they might compete with each other, they can also cooperate with each other. And that was what was interesting about the Galle Dialogue, which is a regional dialogue that has been taking place since 2010. And we were privileged to collaborate with the Sri Lanka Navy on the Galle Dialogue in 2023. And at that dialogue, we had the naval representatives of India, China, and the US all share the same stage and talk about the shared threats to the region, which include non-traditional threats, like you mentioned. So you do have maritime crime, as we are seeing right now with the terrorist attacks on commercial vessels in the Gulf of Aden, Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb. You also have issues of piracy, which are taking place at the start of the century, also resurfacing again. And then you have other issues like IUU fishing, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, as well as environmental disasters, the debt problem that is facing the region, and this issue of, as much as there being as this many minilaterals, there's this issue of regional and global governance in this region. So I would say that those issues of faith-based violence are affecting our region. In 2019, we witnessed how there was an Islamic State attack in Sri Lanka, where 6 locations were targeted by this extremist group. You do have the issues of the current terrorism in the Gulf region affecting geoeconomics also across the region, because now ships have to navigate around the southern coast of Africa, which raises the cost of everyday items for the people in the region. Extreme weather is something that we have also been looking at, and our co-patron of our foundation is from the Maldives, so he's very passionate about this. He's a former president of the Maldives named Mohammed Nasheed, and he started a forum called the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and the Vulnerable 20, which looks at these vulnerable countries and tries to bring them together to the global stage, talking about their shared issues when it comes to climate change. And our patron, when he served as president, I guess was directly able to influence policy in this regard, because he was able to join this group, and we were able to look at how to look at new forms of energy, renewable energy also in the region as a sustainable future for us. And a lot of our region, this Indian Ocean region, realizes the potential of renewable energy as well, because we are affected by extreme weather events. So our patron also proposed the International Climate Change University and a tropical belt initiative, looking at how this region of the world is absorbing a lot of the carbon dioxide or carbon emissions that are taking place across the world. And that was something also that he was able to take to the COP summit, to the president of Brazil, who also was very receiving of this initiative, because we do think that a lot of finance has to be allocated towards this region, which is absorbing a lot of the carbon emissions. So extreme weather is having an impact, but it's also very much influencing how we are trying to respond to it. The Maldives is threatened by the rising sea levels in this region. And so this is why our co-patron is a big advocate of this. But yes, the last point that you had mentioned was geoeconomics, and that I think is what it comes down to at the end of the day. This region is where the growth is supposed to take place. And if you have this great power rivalry trying to play one against another, or this region also needs a lot of development, and often you see that these countries are turning to different international players who are providing this kind of infrastructure development or just ideas of development. And one organization, I guess, which Sri Lanka has recently applied for membership at, is this BRICS grouping. I think this grouping has a lot of interest to us because, well, India and South Africa are both parts of this group, and they're both in the Indian Ocean region. But in 2024, there were 4 additional members from the Indian Ocean countries, which included at that time the UAE, Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure what happened with Saudi Arabia, but I hear that this year also Indonesia is likely to join this grouping. So a lot of the countries in our region are looking at this grouping as an alternative, and I think this might be because of also geoeconomics. The BRICS is a grouping which proposed a digital currency as an alternative currency in 2015. And from there, we saw what happened with cryptocurrencies, with a lot of private actors playing in this. But if this grouping of states or a state is able to back some kind of digital currency, I think that could have a lot more traction in this kind of region. And this is why we are looking at geoeconomic stability also from some of these other organizations.
Thank you, Rishan. I think what you just mentioned, so the concrete examples, be it the geoeconomic confrontation and how it might be, well, not necessarily prevented, but to some extent tackled or managed. And of course, the extreme weather events that you also mentioned show us quite clearly that innovation happens in the region on the one hand, and on the other hand, that partnerships do matter. So sometimes, mostly when it comes to such global challenges, of course, partnerships are key. Working jointly on common solutions are key, because these, well, challenges and risks do not necessarily recognize borders and go far beyond these wicked issues, for instance, such as, of course, climate change and weather events. And as you rightfully mentioned, and luckily that you have this set up already in place, well developed in the region, because just to build on the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report, for 10 years' time, the three main risks that were mentioned are extreme weather events, the first. The second is biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. And the third is critical change to Earth systems. So I think here we can see a clear shift from geopolitical, geoeconomical related risks, from social risks as well, towards really environmental risks. So something that is crucial, of course, is also to have kind of like regional foresight and experts who are working on that to anticipate what is to come and react to that. So we tackled the risks part to some extent, but maybe on a more positive note, I would also like to talk about, and you mentioned a few elements of it, but maybe just dig deeper, some opportunities the region is facing. So what would you say, what are, of course, the key prospects and perspectives for the region, for the Indian Ocean and the actors present for 2025, but not necessarily. Of course, you can go further, and we can talk about in 2 years' time, 10 years' time, as you wish.
Great. Yes, it is broad, and I like to focus more so on opportunities, as I started out with the last segment as well, saying how a lot of growth is taking place in this region. There was a report in 2017 by the PricewaterhouseCoopers, which talked about the world in 2050. And in the top 30 countries, they included India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Pakistan, Iran, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Thailand, South Africa, and Australia, all from this Indian Ocean region. With India and China as the leaders of as number 1 and 2. So, or China and India as 1 and 2. So there is a lot of growth that is projected for this region. Well, first in the Far East, and then moving into the Indian Ocean region, and then from there on into Africa. So we do see that it's important that our countries work together to ensure that this historical shift, because in the past, for about, well, the majority of history, this is where a lot of the trade took place in the world. And then around from the 15th century onwards, there were some slowdowns. But we do see it as regaining this rightful place that this region has occupied in the past. So there is a lot of potential. In terms of the short term for Sri Lanka, I think the places that the country can focus on specifically for growth are, well, the low-hanging fruits would be tourism, which is an easy way also to bring development to remote parts of the island, digitalization, and probably agriculture. And I think this was also what McKinsey had proposed, a consultancy firm had proposed in 2017-18 to the government at the time. So the government has been working around these 3 areas to bring in this kind of modernization in the agriculture sector and modernization also in the other 2 sectors as well. For a long time, we have had a lot of produce taking place in Sri Lanka, but it does, for some reason, it doesn't go from farm or market to the table. That last segment to the table, there's a lot of wastage. So if there can be like cold chain improvement across this sector, then that could improve the agriculture sector, for example. I would say the same would apply across the region. They would probably be looking at these 3 areas for immediate growth, especially with what is taking place in South India with Hyderabad and Karnataka. So and Bangalore. So in these areas, and Chennai, for example, also, there's a lot of tech development and digitalization that is taking place. And so we do see this as an easy way to leapfrog into new technologies. At the same time, there is a big gap in terms of infrastructure still in this region. I think if you look at the Asian Development Bank reports, they'll still say that we need a lot of financing towards infrastructure for the region. So the region will still continue to look at this because there's a large population in this region as well. And so I think 1/3 of the global population is currently in the Indian Ocean region. And so it's important that these communities are still connected to one another and are able to reap the benefits of trade and globalization. Yes.
Yeah, but thank you so much, Rishan. And of course, as you very precisely point out, the 2.0 industrial revolution is coming, and as I hear, you see it definitely as a potential opportunity. Of course, we know that it might also have some risks, but it might be an opportunity. And of course, as you mentioned, the agricultural sector and potentially food security that is also can come up as a risk. But of course, every risk kind of like motivate us to think out of the box and find creative solutions. Thank you also for mentioning infrastructure. So I have one follow-up question on that, and then I would like to tackle an issue after the risks and the opportunities that we mentioned. So just the follow-up question: do you have some infrastructure projects in mind? As you mentioned, that of course infrastructure in some cases are still lacking, that you see as an opportunity, that you see something that will be realistic in 5-10 years time to indeed, on the one hand, even enhance the connectivity within the region and to kind of like respond to this infrastructure gap that you mentioned?
In terms of connectivity in the region, one thing that we are focusing on as a think tank is to try and build up maritime domain awareness. So it's not as much, well, at the same time, it is infrastructure. So it's building an understanding, local understanding of what your maritime domain is, and being able to fuse this also with other initiatives that are taking place across the region so that we all have a better understanding of what is taking place in and across this Indian Ocean region. So I think there is a lot of potential in that. At the same time, renewable energy, as I said previously, presents a lot of opportunity in this region. I think our previous Minister of Energy said that there was about 200,000 gigawatts of renewable energy potential. And so we are working quite a bit on renewable energy, mostly solar and wind, but also we have the strong heritage of hydro power in Sri Lanka, hydroelectric power. And so we have also, under that climate prosperity plan, which was brought forward under the Climate Vulnerable Forum, we looked at linking our energy grid with that of India's, and that's taking place at the moment to ensure that we can export it also to the region. So this, I guess, pipeline connectivity to enable renewable energy export, because I think the issue sometimes is the storage, the battery storage when it comes to renewable energy. So if we are able to have this connectivity with South India, that benefits us because we can export our energy in time to come, as well as looking at regions like well, I think our patron had spoken with the former Prime Minister of Singapore, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, about doing some kind of connectivity between Singapore and Sri Lanka as well. And in turn, Singapore was looking at connectivity with Australia. So this link would go all the way from Australia to India. And, you know, the potential in India is so vast that they already import a lot of energy from the region. So we just need to link ourselves up more with their growth, and it's beneficial to us. At the same time, An initiative that was, I guess, formalized in the region was from around 2013 was the Belt and Road Initiative, which was brought forward by President Xi Jinping. But it was bringing together many of these existing projects that were taking place, mostly around infrastructure development, because there was a gap. And these countries, for example, Sri Lanka, we saw a need for, we elected a government that proposed a port in the south as well, right next to one of the busiest trafficked maritime highways in the world, which makes sense. So the people that voted for this government in 2005, and then the government went out and asked various countries to build it. In the end, China agreed to build it. And by around 2000, and this was based on, I think, the first feasibility study came from a Canadian company brought by the Canadian government in 2003. Then the next feasibility, because the then government said that they wanted a financial feasibility and that wasn't provided. Then in 2005, a Danish company, Ramboll, brought the next feasibility study for this port. So it was seen as a feasible, and both of these feasibility studies said that it was a feasible option given how busy that region is. Unfortunately, when it came online, there wasn't as much traffic or coming to the port, and maybe this is also due to the management at the time. But having then some private companies took it over, and now there seems to be more growth in that. So I think with the infrastructure development that's taking place, they must also look at the financing around these infrastructure projects, and also how to make them feasible, be it through public-private partnerships or various initiatives like this as well. And this is something that I think that has been realized over the last 5 to 10 years. And so we're now seeing that this port in the south is doing a lot more activity. Similarly, in other parts of the world where these Belt and Road infrastructure projects have taken place, you are seeing that they are getting a bit more traction because of engagement from the region as well. Another big Chinese project in Sri Lanka was the port city, and this will only really become viable, I think, if a lot of Indian companies invest there. And there are financial incentives for them to do so, and a lot of them are surely looking at these incentives that these are offered. So it's about how, at the same time, while you have these infrastructure projects, how do you green them? And then how do you also make them financially viable for the country? And this is something that I think Sri Lanka has managed to lead the way through a very difficult scenario coming out of our economic crisis. Yeah.
Thank you, Roshan. This is clear. I would like to just briefly mention, and I would like to have, of course, your views on it. One change that happened maybe a bit far, like geographically speaking, far from the region and far from Sri Lanka, but might still have quite important impact on the region, which is the recent change in the Oval Office. So that can, of course, have overarching geoeconomic and geopolitical implications for the region, not just for the Indian Ocean region, but of course, this is our focus today. So I would like to ask you how the geopolitical and geoeconomic decisions of Trump 2.0 might impact the region for the upcoming, of course, term of President Trump.
Yes, okay. So we also went through an election in September, and then following that, we had the election of President Trump in America. So when you say Oval Office, I assume you were referring to the White House.
Yes, that's true. Fair point.
Oh, we did have an Oval section to be honest.
Sorry, this time this is the U.S. Oval Office, but of course we can also talk about the other.
So I think one big way that it'll positively affect the region, and I like to focus on positives mostly, is through, I think something that President Trump had mentioned was how he was going to bring down the price of oil. By the end of 2025, we'll see a sharp drop in the price of oil. It's one of the campaign promises that were made. And while our region does realize the possibility and the potential for renewables, at the same time, we are still very dependent on hydrocarbons and fossil fuels. And a lot of hydrocarbon trade takes place in this Indian Ocean region, moving from the Gulf regions to East Asia. So, well, hydrocarbons, if the prices of fuels come down at the end of the day, it means that the prices of goods and services, we're still very much dependent on imports. A lot of those imports, well, we are an island nation, they come from the sea. So they're dependent on container ships and tankers. So bringing in those imports, if the costs are reduced, that benefits end users because the prices of the goods and services, well, goods mostly will reduce. So our region, as much as it's not favorable for the long-term future to be dependent on hydrocarbons, it still has a large impact on this region. And so we can see that if prices come down as a result of this, it'll benefit the region tremendously. And that, I think, influences a lot of what takes place still in this region, the price of crude and oil, yes. Similarly, I think, well, we've already seen how towards the end of President Biden's term and the start of President Trump's term, we've started to see some stability in the Middle East region, or not the Middle East from Sri Lanka's perspective, but I guess it's West Asia from our perspective. And so in this region, we've started to see like a bit more stability, and global stability is good for the region. We all saw how when the conflict started between Russia and Ukraine, this region didn't think that it would have effects on our region, but over time it started to have effects because of the effects of crude as well as fertilizer impacts, and then fuels and grains as well. People didn't realize how dependent we are on some of these other regions for these imports. And so if there is global stability, it benefits our region as well, because we just want there to be stability so that we can continue to grow in the ways that we are projected to grow by the IMF and all of these international organizations.
Thank you, Rishan. I think we completely agree that stability is basically, to some extent, a human need and the requirement, as you mentioned, for growth and for development. So before we conclude, this is a question that, of course, I must ask, given the fact that we're a French think tank, we're based in Paris. We would like to be keen on learning more about how local actors, such as Sri Lanka, perceive presence in the region, as the country has, for instance, 1/3 of its exclusive economic zone in the Indian Ocean region. As I previously mentioned during the introduction, France is, of course, a European power, but it's also the only EU member state that is also perceived as a power in the Indian Ocean region. So I would like to hear a bit more about that from you, how France is perceived, how France's economic presence, diplomatic presence, and of course, for instance, security-related presence is perceived in the region. And if I'm correct, you have also a few slides on that. So I will share my screen right away.
Yes, there are some slides that I shared with you on this. I guess pivoting from the previous discussion as you bring up those slides, and what we started off with was this terminology of the Indo-Pacific. from Sri Lanka's perspective, we've been part of the Indian Ocean for millennia. Only recently has this been brought into a larger region called the Indo-Pacific, which we have historically not been part of, the Pacific Ocean. And so we want to ensure that that our place in the Indian Ocean is still valued as well. And I think France very much realizes this from their perspective, because so when we brought forward the initiative for the International Climate Change University and some of these environmental initiatives that President Wickremesinghe started, he was invited for the Summit for a New Global Financing Pact by President Macron in 2023. And following that visit, as you have on the screen now, we had in 2023, July was the first time a president of France had visited Sri Lanka in 75 years of diplomatic relations. And this was a really strong indicator of France's support for the region, the Indian Ocean region, and Sri Lanka also as a player in this region. And I think you have a quote at the bottom there, which was taken from Twitter, which later became X, that we are both Indian Ocean nations, because France, as you mentioned rightly, is an Indian Ocean country. They have territories in the Indian Ocean. It's a bit difficult for me as a Sri Lankan to speak about France, especially since you have more expertise in this regard. But I can quote or reiterate what your ambassador at the time, Jean-François Pacté, said at one of our sessions in 2023 as well. And I'll share that link as well, and maybe you can share it with your members, where he spoke about this historic visit. And as you mentioned, 30%, as he said as well, 30% of France's EEZ is in the Indian Ocean region, 30, not 13. And so that's a large portion of your exclusive economic zone. And so you have stakes, as he called it. And I think building on this visit of President Macron, we have this long history of 75 years of diplomatic relations between our two countries. At the same time, there have been official level meetings, bilateral official level meetings the last few years as well, following this visit. And so we're in a new era of partnership, as President Macron promised then. And so we are looking forward to working more with France in this region, because as middle powers, which is how I often say Sri Lanka, some people see us as a small island, but we have 22 million people. And we have been in this region for a long time, and we're Asia's oldest democracy. So we can play this role of complementarity with each other in this region, and also ensure that there isn't this great power rivalry that has taken place in other regions in the Indian Ocean. This Indo-Pacific terminology is something that we are still, Sri Lanka is still cautious about it. And so I think because for a long time there was Asia Pacific, which was part of the hub and spoke initiative, the San Francisco system. And it seems that Asia Pacific has been sidelined for Indo-Pacific. And I think it built it off, I think around 2017, when then President Trump of the US renamed the Pacific Command to the Indo-Pacific Command. So it was very much a security-related decision. But the definition of the Indo-Pacific differs. So I think if you move to the next slide, I have some maps on comparative visions of the Indo-Pacific, whereas for France, it very much includes the entire Indian Ocean region. The US's vision ends at the western border of India, and India's version of the Indo-Pacific includes the Gulf states as well as Africa, very similar to what we would define as the Indian Ocean region. So the differing visions of the Indo-Pacific make this and the definition of very concrete in our perspective, whereas Asia Pacific was somewhat defined for a couple of decades, and maybe if you include the Indian Ocean into that architecture, the Indo-Asia Pacific, it could also uphold ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which sees ASEAN as managing these connected areas. The caution with coupling two areas, as much as I would sometimes see myself as very outward looking and trying to integrate as much as possible with outside nations. In the Pacific Ocean, you've had great power rivalry. You have also the largest garbage dump, a lot of dumping that takes place in the Pacific Ocean. So we don't want some of those issues to spill over into the Indian Ocean. And it's important that the Indian Ocean countries talk to each other as much as possible, but also talk with these great powers to make sure that in coupling these definitions, we learn the lessons of the past. And if you move to my next slide, I guess I have a better image of France's vision. So these maps are shared with me by another French think tank, the Indo-Pacific Observatory of the Foundation for Strategic Research. And they had done this mapping of France. And from what I understand, President Macron first spoke about the Indo-Pacific internationally from Sydney in Australia at the Garden Island. And I think that was in 2018. And so obviously France has stakes in both the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, but France's presence also justifies their ability to look at these larger regions. We do see that France is a strong player in this region, but can also grow their strength in this region by working with other middle powers. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, security cooperation is an important area where we can all work together. And actually, one of our members from France, Frédéric Gras, he's written about the Indian Ocean as well. You may have read his book, but he's also written an article as well recently for our research foundation, and I'll share that article with you. It's on our website, currently in public domain, so you'll be able to access it. And he talks about how we can try to work towards this kind of security cooperation among the Indian Ocean countries. And this is an initiative that we are going to be taking forward as well. Next week, we'll be at the Indian Ocean Conference in Oman. And that will be looking at how we can bring together the Indian Ocean countries and also start talking about some kind of security cooperation among the Indian Ocean countries. The last time there was a heads of state meeting of the Indian Ocean countries was in 2017 at the IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association meeting in Jakarta, when Indonesia was the chair. Currently, Sri Lanka is the chair of the IORA. And as I mentioned, we are part of that academic group. If you can move to the next slides, you can see the direct quote that your ambassador, Jean-François Pacté, made I think it's the next slide, at one of our discussion events. And so, yes, France has these stakes in the Indian Ocean. And so it makes sense for France to be here and talking about these shared issues of the middle powers. Yes.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Rishan. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, so we will need to conclude. So first of all, I want to thank you for going through the past, the present, and to some extent the future of the region. I think now we have a much broader and precise overview, and at the same time, when it comes to the region, Sri Lanka's position within the region, and of course the stake that other middle and great power powers have in that region that will remain central for all of us. I think we will follow up whatever is happening in the region with great interest. So thank you for this enlightening discussion. Also, thank you for evoking some opportunities. Maybe that can also be an opportunity for us to take the stock, I don't know, in 1 year, 2 years' time, of what happened since our current discussion. And others do not know that, but we are recording this podcast on the 4th of February, which is Sri Lanka's National Day. So I would like to thank you for your time that you dedicated to this recording despite the celebrations. We wish you a very festive National Day and a great holiday. And we really do hope that we can follow up on our discussion, see what happens next. Of course, France also has an Indo-Pacific strategy that we are very keen on, monitoring and seeing what is implemented and how that strategy might concretely take place. So thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. We're very much looking forward to any further exchanges that might come up, and wish you a very good national holiday and a good afternoon.
You're very welcome. I guess the last slide which I had was the IORA map, because it showed that France is a member of IORA. It was an Indian Ocean Rim Association, and Sri Lanka is currently the chair, but we're hoping that, and our president was pushing for the high-level meeting, that hopefully this will be an initiative that India takes forward in the coming years. So as you can see from that last map, you can see the members of the IORA, and I think the French flag is at the top of the map. So yes, we very much look forward to continuing this discussion and working with yourselves and other think tanks also from France to build upon this shared history that we have. And I think we have a good, strong footing now to go forward to talk about the more intricate details. And we have a lot of members also who have expertise of this region who we can bring together as well to discuss these shared issues. So yes, thank you, Esther and Dominic, for organizing this Cafe Sapiens, and I think is what you called it. And I look forward to engaging with yourselves and other think tanks in the future.
Thank you, Rishan, and of course we invite everyone to check out your website. So that we will also try to share either in the comment session or at the end of our podcast, potentially on the screen. We will see how we can manage that. So definitely we invite everyone to check out your website, your work, of course, the study that you mentioned, and any additional document and documentation that can be accessed through your website. Of course, I guess mainly these are English documents, so our podcast itself was in English, but we will make it available for the French public with upcoming subtitles. So thank you so much, Rishan. Have a nice day. Have a very, very good celebration, and hope to talk to you soon.
Looking forward to it, Esther.
Likewise. Thank you, Rishan.